Hey everybody, it's Matthew. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are of course going to be talking about Chris Cornell, since it has been 6 years since he departed this earth and left a massive crater in all of our souls. Those of us that were moved and appreciated his music and his work throughout his career are never going to be the same from this. But let's take a minute to talk about the man that was and celebrate the things that he did in his career. Of course, Chris Cornell's career begins as early as 1980, which I believe is when he joined his first band. So he would have been around 16 or so when he did that. And his career, of course, after that spanned 38 years, almost 4 decades of incredible work. And he was in like 5 or 6 bands before Soundgarden even started, which is kind of funny to think about. A lot of people don't know that. But he had already been cutting his teeth by the time Soundgarden had come around. So there was a lot of experience there. So going into this, let me give you a couple of numbers here. So throughout his career, there were 16 albums that he had a major hand in creating, from Soundgarden to Audioslave to his own solo albums, of course. That's a lot of albums. If you exclude the first 6 years before he actually was ever recorded on anything, that ends up being 32 years, which is averaging an album every 2 years for his whole career, which is kind of an incredible number. And with that, and I went and counted these here, he had a major part in writing about 241 songs. And this is not counting some songs that he didn't have a major hand in. There's a few Soundgarden songs where he doesn't have the writing credits on that are left off. And that also doesn't include the several different times he was featured on a song from another artist. So the real number is probably around 250 or so. But I mean, that's a significant number of songs. You know, it's not a lot of people that can say they've written literal hundreds of songs. That's a pretty ridiculous number, and just tells you how incredible that he was. And to go back to the amount of work he did, there was a time, of course, you guys may know their first album on A&M, Louder Than Love. He did most of the writing on that, and then turns around. Within that, he's doing, by the way, this is within basically the same year. He also writes most of the Temple of the Dog record in the same year, which of course it came out about 4 months later after Louder Than Love. But this is in the span of the same year. This guy worked on 2 full albums in basically less than a year, and they sound, and they're good. Like, that kind of grind is ridiculous for any creative person to be able to put out that much quality material so quickly. Is a kind of a mind-boggling thing to consider. And then you even go to his biggest songs, like Black Hole Sun. He thought of the melody in the car driving back home from the studio. And then once he got there, wrote the song in about 10 or 15 minutes. There are testimonies where it's 10, sometimes it's 15. So we'll go the longer one and say 15, but to make, a song that's that huge that quickly, like, it's, how does your brain work that way? How can you possibly do that so well and so quickly? Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. How can someone be so damn talented? Of course, that goes back to all the time he spent before that getting through there, getting through the early parts of his career, probably writing a lot of bad songs, before good ones start that you can record actually start coming out. So there is a lot of time there before that he actually spent getting ready to get to this point. Of course, like I said, it was 6 years before Soundgarden even started that he was in band, and they didn't record, actually 4 years, sorry, but they didn't record anything until 1986, and that wasn't even a full thing. That was a few songs for for another project, that was just the CZ Records. I forgot the name, the Deep Six compilation, which had songs from 6 different bands on it, and they happened to be one of the bands they wanted to put on that recording. Of course, their first full material didn't happen until 1987, and by then Chris was 23. So there was a lot of time there he spent getting songs written and performed and out of the way so that the good ones can start coming up. Not to say that all their early stuff was good per se. There's always a continuous thing of growth. But once he hit Louder Than Love, that was where that stuff really ballooned, and he started being a more prolific writer, and it just kept growing and growing and growing from there, which brings us to the stylistic variety that he had, which is completely crazy, starting out in bands doing covers and things like that, maybe the odd original song here and there. And then of course Soundgarden comes along. The first record is very punk influenced. It has very obvious like Black Sabbath kind of sounds and things like that in it, and was very much a product of its current time. And then Ultra Mega OK, they expand on the same sound, get a little bit weirder, get a little bit darker, and it continues from there. Then Louder Than Love comes on, and that's a kind of a different thing. That's more of a classic rock, kind of an 80s style rock record that was, of course, part of the overall meaning and kind of joke of the album, which was making fun of 80s rock music. So there it is. But then continuing to evolve, going from that to Temple of the Dog, which has a very bluesy, very blues rock and just regular old blues style to it, and different things like that, is completely different stylistic experience from anything he was doing with Soundgarden, when it was a major point of growth with his vocals that proved he could do a lot more things with it than he thought were possible at the time. And then that goes to Bad Motor Finger, which is very much, has a lot of metal influence, has some progressive elements and things in it. Very different vibe from the previous stuff, and it's probably the best vocals he's ever done for anything. Just overall, the amount of power, the amount of aggression, like he was doing things that sounded inhuman to, the untrained ear, and even to the trained ear, it still is like, how is that possible? And if you listen to the Outshine isolated vocal, you will understand what I mean. You can easily find that searching for it on YouTube, so not that hard. But that's a complete stylistic change from stuff before, from the Temple of the Dog. Like, it's like, how can you just do a complete 180, but everything still sounds great? He's improving his guitar writing and things like that, and everything still sounds good. And then you go to Super Unknown, which takes back some of the aggression, gets a little more progressive, has some pop elements, adds some even older bluesy or crooner-ish style stuff into it, That's a different thing stylistically. It sounds great. Down on the Upside kind of sounds like the same thing, but then they inject the weird, like, country and Americana vibes into some of the stuff with that, and that's a really interesting stylistic thing. And again, no problem, he sounds right at home with that. And then you get the big jump stylistically to his solo stuff with Euphoria Morning, and I don't know how those songs were in his brain, from where he came from to going to there. The different melodies on Euphoria Morning are so different and intricate and kind of off the wall weird. They are so atypical of any normal vocal melodies, and yet everything sounds good, and he proves he can do a much more intimate, laid back style of vocal that you hadn't heard him do before, and at the same time inject moments of aggression and pain into it that really drive home all the emotions on that record. It's a completely insane thing with like pop and jazz and rock elements sprinkled around through it. And he even does his best kind of, some of them sound like he's doing an impression of a jazz singer, and he sounds like he's been singing jazz his whole life with some of these vocal melodies. And I don't know how you do that. And then Audio Slave, you go to a more radio-friendly style rock and things like that. His voice has gotten messed up from some of his addiction issues and things like that. And he still puts in the grind and goes through it and produces some really great iconic songs in the early 2000s that a lot of people remember. Goes back to his solo stuff doing similar things. And Carry On had more like power ballad style things on it, and wasn't so, intimate and intricate melody wise as Euphoria Morning. But then he decides for his next one, he's going to partner with Timbaland, a hip hop producer, and make a record. And it didn't do well, but again, that experimental quality of trying to change things up and do something different and sell a different idea, and injecting some of those different vocal ideas and injecting kind of that hip hop vibe into some of the stuff, and doing more electronic elements, and he still sounds good on that. The new Soundgarden stuff comes. We're back to broody and moody again, and it sounds great. So he'd been away for that for a long time, and then injected right back into it. It's like he never went and did anything else. And then finally with, Higher Truth, that's also a completely different stylistic thing. We have departed everything else from before. We've gone to a very intimate singer-songwriter type of album with songs with a lot of acoustic instruments, a lot of acoustic guitar, some mandolin, different things. He experiments with some different things vocal-wise in that, but his voice sounds so great. He sounds like an amazing crooner that's been doing that kind of music for years. He absolutely doesn't miss a beat. The vocals have so much depth and emotion in them. It might be the best album he's ever made, quite frankly, just because of it, the material selling itself when you listen to it so well. And like that, the amount of stylistic variety in his career is pretty astonishing. Some artists talk about trying to change their sound, and they either come out with something that's not that different or is weird and not really palatable to anyone. But Chris, that never happened. Everything he made sounded good enough, despite crazy stylistic differences, that you could enjoy all of it. And there's very few artists that can do something like that. You may not be able to count them on two hands. To go from this punk stuff, metal stuff, blues rock things, weird pop, jazz, crazy melody stuff that's super emotional, back to radio-friendly rock music, jumping back to doing hip-hop and electronic stuff on a record, and then doing a singer-songwriter record. Like, that's just where he's all over the place, man. And everything is just good. It's like it just pours out of him, all of this talent and stuff, and onto the page. And don't know a lot of people that can do that. And of course, there's Seasons, which that song might be the single greatest thing that he has, is because that is a 4-track tape that is 2 guitar tracks, 2 vocal tracks. That is it for the whole thing. And it has such great emotion and weight, and it was so damn good that they put it on the Seasons soundtrack as is. The only thing that might have been changed was they might have added some reverb to some stuff on there that wasn't already on the tape. But the 4 tracks that he recorded were it. And the quality that that simple piece of material has is incredible. That goes bounds past its own, means being a 4-track tape. And, that's what we want to think about, is how incredible and how cool each thing that he made was, and how each thing could have an important emotional impact on a person. And of course, when he died, I was not like super sad, because I don't think I had been listening to the music long enough, and I had not yet made a decision that I wanted to be a musician at that time yet either. But it kind of just left it empty feeling, just empty, sad, just, I don't know, it made me feel nothing, basically, which is almost a worse thing, because you kind of just feel stuck in that moment, finding it out. And yet, in a weird way, I somehow identified with him a lot in terms of understanding the struggle of having to deal with a lot of anxiety and things outside of the music and outside of yourself that weren't necessarily, the exact reason you have a problem, but they contribute to a lot of difficulties and a lot of pain, having to deal with a disability, and that creating anxiety and things around that are in similar ways to some of the things I think he was feeling. And a lot of the songs, especially the Soundgarden ones, they identify with ideas that I feel very similarly about, in a weird way. And that's ultimately what made me want to be a musician or try it out, because I felt the way I did about his music, and in a way I wanted to continue a similar, through line into that, because I have very similar feelings about things and, similar emotions, and I felt like I could maybe grab onto some of that and make a career making not the same kind of music, but similar from a idea perspective or an emotional perspective, which ends up with me. I have a very bad tendency of writing in 7/4 and things like that, but hey, that's fine. That's a lot more fun than writing stuff that doesn't change a whole lot or is really predictable, so there it is. Probably one of the greatest musicians to ever lived, Mr. Chris Cornell. If you enjoyed this discussion, of course, like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below about your favorite things about Chris Cornell. Maybe drop your favorite song, or drop whatever thoughts you might have about the gentleman. And of course, don't forget to click the bell to get a notification when a new video is out. And I'll see you guys next time for another video. Have a good one.